Feeling the need for change is at the heart of your ability to make it happen. Welcome to Turning Inward. I'm Vivian Carrasco, your teacher, mentor, midwife, and host of this amazing podcast. Together, we're going to navigate our interior lives. We're going to unearth our own personal truth, our insights, and our inner knowing. Change what you see in the world, how you make decisions, and the way you lead yourself and others. Welcome back to the Turning Inward podcast. I'm trying to suppress a laugh because there's been a little of pre-recording humor happening between Shar, Nancy, and I. You have joined another episode of the Heart-to-Heart Conversations, a very fancy title for the beautiful, in-the-moment conversation that happens between us and the insights that emerge. So, hi, ladies.
Hello.
Hi.
Oh, I was wondering what I was going to say as I was saying it. I actually, on my last interview, I attempted to have a framework of an opening, and I totally it was like going against the grain for me. I love this in the moment generative life happening mode that we get into.
Me too.
Me three. That's the third time I've said that today.
Me three. So shall we start on the asking questions? That was honestly, so I say honestly because I'm in disbelief at the moment. I wrote down just words that, because I figured that the experience that I've had over the last day or today or last couple of days could be mirrored in some way to the three of us. And one of them is asking questions.
What do you mean?
Well, before I
Sorry.
So let me give the listeners a little bit of intro because it's a bit of an inside joke at the moment. I said, Nancy, you had mentioned something about consciousness studies and how you haven't done research, but they'll eventually figure out A, B, or C. We were talking about our dream state. And I'm like, I don't need them to figure it out. I know the answer. This is it. And both of you came back with, I have a lot of questions. So, and the term is literally asking questions. That's one of the things that I think what I was noticing in my way of being or in my life is that I ask questions now a lot more than I used to. And before, what I was looking for is just answers. So it's kind of a shift that I've noticed. And maybe that's why I have it written down and that's what I mean. But I'm open to changing my mind about that at any moment.
I'm still not sure I understand.
I think just asking questions about things, not being stuck in certainty or in a specific belief.
Oh, okay. I don't know how to be any other way, and I know that some people find that annoying. It's like, let's just decide that it's, A, B, or C. And it's just like, well, but it depends on the context. And, what do you mean when you say, consciousness? That's a big word. Nobody knows what they mean when they say consciousness. First, you have to find what you're talking about before you can talk about it if you're a scientist, I would think. And I am not a scientist, so.
Do you think we don't do that enough as humans, is sort of establish the frame or the definition of what it is we're talking about? Because you made a good point. Like anytime I say a word, it's coming from my own experience and it's not automatically connected to your experience.
Right. So I have a different filter by definition. So I guess what I struggle with personally in my own life and my own relationships is how to find that balance of specificity and depth of meaning when I'm craving it, and then just letting it be like, well, it doesn't matter if we really understand each other every moment of the day. It's probably not possible. And, kind of gets in the way of a good time sometimes, so you have to stay fluid about whether what you're doing in the moment with someone else, which we are now, I would say, I'm assuming that we are now, of whether it's time to go deep and define things, and even if it's just for the moment, and be very precise about what we're talking about and what we mean. And then like just regular life where, you just say stupid stuff and it doesn't matter. And we don't have to be deep. And both of those things can be a great pleasure. Does that make any sense at all?
Yes. Yes.
It does. I think there's a lot of value in what they say, like asking better questions or asking the right questions, kind of. But I agree 100% with what you're saying, Charlene, too, because I think that what I notice happens is, if you're involved in a lot of inner exploration, it's almost like you come up with your own inner language and way of relating. And sometimes that, creates a context of understanding that only you understand. It's not even, and that sometimes, it's then translating that. So that's just sort of what you then bring with you to a conversation. Almost, it's like you bring with you your understanding and this way of relating. And then I realize how often I do this lately, where then there's this assumption that we're sort of on the same page without checking in at all. And I realize oh no, we're not really. And so I understand what you're saying too, where so when is it valuable then to sort of add some definition to something and as part of a framework for your conversation so you can be relating in ways you might want to or need to be. And then, when is it just not matter? When is it just, and maybe that relates a little bit more to your personal needs in talking. If you really need to be seen or recognized or understood, or really, it might feel more, sort of, there might be a bit more of a desire there to bridge gaps. And if you're just sort of blah, blah, blahing, or you're, I don't know, you're just sort of, there's a lot of times I realize I'm talking, I may even be doing this right now just to hear myself talk because I'm kind of working through something, in those times, somebody asking questions to clarify feels great. But then when they say something, contradictory or whatever, that's when I catch myself. And then, decisions need to be made about how to proceed and relate.
Yeah, totally.
I find myself talking out loud to understand myself too, but Char, is it true that you don't do that as much?
Oh, I definitely do.
You do? Okay.
Yes, but I try to make sure that I'm doing it in front of a willing participant.
Mm.
And then I really would like it if they would actually pay attention.
Is that too much to ask? What level of attention?
Right? Well, good question, right?
Good questions. Yeah.
Well, what I want is the kind of attention that is, reflecting back to me what they're hearing, but still open to letting it be about my idea, not taking it off in another direction unless I'm oh, this is fun, let's take it in another direction.
It's mutual.
Again, it's what the need is that's underneath. And we read each other and we get it wrong lots of the time, and that's fine too. But I think what I was talking about even more was, the societal, the predisposition and preference for small talk and not getting too deep about anything. And then remembering to switch back. And then when you switch back, this is so silly. I'm really threading a needle here, I think. Doing it in a way that's open and honest, I guess,
I'm hearing you and I'm sensing, I don't know what the emotion that's coming up, but it's making me feel hot, kind of like a combination of Catholic guilt and confession at the same time, because I don't switch. It's true. It's so true. I don't switch as much anymore. I just make a choice not to have those conversations. And it makes me feel guilty. If I'm getting my hair cut or if I'm getting a massage or my nails done, I don't speak at all because I'd rather not speak than be surface anymore.
Wow.
And for instance, Jacob brought a friend over. He was picking something up out of, that was here at the house. And 2 or 3 minutes passed and he looked over at me. He goes, how did you guys get that deep that fast? How does this happen? And I was like, I don't know. You know? Sorry. So the challenge is I want to fit in more, right? I want to switch when I need to, but I really don't too at the same time. Because I guess I'm needing the same thing that you are, Shar, and that's, and I don't remember your exact words, so I might be putting words in your mouth based on my experiences, that those meaningful conversations, that depth of, listening and receiving and giving at the same time.
Well, yeah, I think it's kind of what I'm talking about is finding the balance, because I do see the value in being light sometimes and having fun with that. I'm not as good at that as I am at going deep, but I can see, there are situations when that's really just the thing, it's like everybody doesn't have to go deep all the time. I'm definitely looking for it. I definitely love to do it. Well, so there's a question. Okay, this is the question that's coming up for me about this is it like a boundary incursion to try to go deep with someone when they don't want to?
That's a very good question. And what I'm sensing is I would sense when they don't want to, which is why I don't speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I could be wrong, obviously. I hope I don't try to take someone where they don't want to go. That would be...
I wasn't saying that you do at all.
No, I know that, but I'm like reflecting on myself, like, are you doing that, right? I'm questioning it.
Yeah, because it's really not right, I guess.
I think, maybe that's kind of the purpose of some of the more superficial, so to speak, kind of conversation, is that kind of feeling each other out, like to see if there's a connection there, a real one. So I think to me, it feels almost a little like my question in some way is, how can I transform small talk to a way that isn't just like, so what do you do? Like all those things that are so kind of sizing each other up or, kind of identity related or whatever. And then using that to decide whether or not we are on the same page or not enough. And it's, safer to ask a more personal question, or we've created some kind of opening. Like, if I'm a lawyer and I learn you're a lawyer, it doesn't necessarily mean we can go deep together kind of thing. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but you know what I mean? Like, and I think there's something to be said about kind of examining what our needs are in connection and in conversation. And I hear what you're saying about that in terms of consent and boundaries, because we don't have the right to know everything about somebody or have them share what they don't want to share. Of course, we're not in control of that. The other person is, but it also kind of, the allowance there, I think, is to be comfortable and give each other permission to say like, no, I don't want to talk about that, or I don't feel comfortable sharing that, and not have that be like, it just let people have that option without being hurtful, because we get to know each other in different ways and at different speeds and, levels of intimacy that are created. That's contextual too, like in a coaching relationship or call versus, like you said, with your hairstylist or someone you meet at a party or in the grocery store line. It's sort of, there's times when I have met someone and gone deep real fast, and those didn't end up being like safe, great long-term relationships either. And there's been times when I'm sure both of you could relate to this too, where I'm there minding my own business and somebody is telling me their whole life story in way too much intimate detail for us just sitting here next to each other on a plane or that kind of thing. And I don't, with boundaries and permissions or whatever, like my worry in cutting someone off or, I usually just sit there and listen, and I'm crossing my own boundaries then. So, there's a lot to this, and how to navigate it in a way that feels both self-affirming and kind. And I think meets the underlying need, which I think is like, we want authentic sort of connection or sense of belonging and trust and reciprocity with people in relationships.
Yeah. So there's a lot of questions, and they're not really about consciousness. And yet, what's coming up for me is that we, each of us in the world, not just each of us talking to each other here now, have intentions and desires And those shape what we experience, so like what we get to interact with as we move through our day. And I guess that's where, like, to me, the way that I'm thinking about consciousness these days is in like the interaction of that frontier. What do you say about that?
Metaphor is coming to mind, and it's I heard it from Rick. He's a neuropsychologist, and he describes. So I'm imagining, because you said we shape our experience. Our experience is shaped by our attentions and our desires, and the way he translates that from, and speaking for him. So Rick, if I'm wrong, correct me. He describes the brain as our attention sits on the brain like the brain is tofu, and our attention is like a Dyson vacuum cleaner and a spotlight at the same time. So that's the intention, right? And the desire, it's like, right? And it's sitting on tofu, so it's forming. When you cook tofu, and I don't cook tofu often, if ever, it just takes on the flavor of what you cook it with. And that's what came to mind for me, is that, at a level, we are physically unable to take in all the data in front of us. So our mind has to filter it. And it filters it through our attention, which is in my experience, I'm translating that into what I'm desiring or what my intention is. Because we see from the inside out, rain is always the same. But if I'm having a picnic, I'm not going to be happy about it. But if I'm growing a garden that needs some rain, then I'm going to be jumping up and down. That's what came up for me.
Yeah.
So the idea of asking better questions, if someone is listening to us and is thinking to themselves, this is super interesting, right? Not looking at the world from a certainty and answer standpoint, give me the answers. But instead, what questions am I asking? How do we ask better questions? What is a better question?
What pops out for me right away is, better is a very loaded word, right? Maybe useful, and then useful for what, So like it all depends. So how do we do it? I think you have to feel your way through it. This is weird. What's coming up for me now is that sometimes I get in a state where I don't want to think up questions because I don't want to have to then be responsible for, sitting in that energy or moving forward in that way. So like not asking a question or not even formulating questions is a way of just pausing and resting. And then when you're actually like, I should speak for myself, when I'm actually in a process of creating something, then there's so many ways, that questions just keep presenting themselves. That's the way I get engaged. I just happen to be in a kind of a day where I'm just having a down day, and it's just like, oh my gosh, like I can't be formulating questions for myself today. I don't want to have to, move forward today. I'm just resting. And somehow I feel like whenever I've actually been in the process of creation, the questions just keep presenting themselves. Oh, I know what the next question is. I know what the next question is. And you find your way forward by them presenting, and then finding out. I used to have a joke when I was in the middle of running my company. It was like, we have to find out what we don't know. And those are the questions, right? It's like, oh, I think I know this. So, on we go. I'm not sure I'm explaining this properly, but, questions are an iterative thing, I guess, is in addition to being generative. And also feel to me personally, sometimes like a responsibility, and sometimes it's a responsibility I want to shirk.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And, what I was hearing you say about today is the question was, what do I need? And the answer was rest. And that was, boom, done. I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying about responsibility with questions, because I think I have used them in the past as sort of kind of a self-defense and a protective measure in some way. Like I would rather, when I used to feel more apologetic about myself and kind of not being good enough. I didn't want people asking me what I did for a living or what because it triggered not enoughness in me. So instead, I would be the one asking the questions and, listening or getting to know someone in some way. But it's true, because I think there's a lot of times that I did that as kind of a habitual measure. And I wasn't actually that curious or necessarily listening. I was more or less playing a role. And so I like the way you said that, though, too, about, asking questions, particularly in certain contexts. I think it is a responsibility or a willingness to kind of show up with that in a way that feels in integrity for yourself and for, what you're doing. I hadn't thought about it quite like that before until you said it that way.
Thank you. I don't know why I'm having this response today either. But you also said, I was like, yeah, I don't feel like asking questions today because of this. And you're like, the question in that is, what do I need? And it's like, okay, so we can't actually get through our day without asking questions. We're unconsciously asking, what will I do next? What will I eat? Which direction will I go? Right? So, but we're not aware of them. So maybe that is a clue to asking, quote unquote, better questions, right? Or useful questions is like, what questions am I already asking unconsciously that I'm not even aware of? And, is that serving me?
I love it because that's also, I don't know how to put language to this at the moment, but that's, we said consciousness, but that's kind of like, part of the levels of consciousness is what you just said. Maybe we're not aware of the questions we're asking that are framing our experience, that are leading us forward. And it becomes, and you're right, better is such a loaded word. Maybe it's just a question. Are you asking questions, or what are the questions you're asking? I like that better, so much better. And who are you asking them of?
Oh, I love that question.
And I'm going to say this because it just popped in my mind, but if you're asking them of someone else before you ask them of yourself, you're being lazy, That's loaded too, huh?
Yeah, well, I think I probably do that sometimes to my husband.
Aww. It's hard for me to admit this, but I feel a little entitled to be lazy with my husband.
Yeah, well, it's a partnership, so,
Yeah. But is it fair?
There are pitfalls. No, it's not fair.
Yeah.
But, he can call unfair, and I can say, okay, never mind. It's not a big deal.
True. I love that.
Well, sometimes you don't know your answer until somebody says, let's go for Italian, and you're like, no, I actually want soup and a sandwich.
There's a study actually on that. That is literally how our brain works. Like until you and this is so nerdy of me. So I wanted to understand why when David would say, we had this dance, right? This habitual response to each other where he'd say, where do you want to go for dinner? And I'd say A or B. And then he'd flip it and do C and D. And I thought to myself, this isn't intentionally malicious. This is not just ignoring my request. There's something more. And maybe because I went looking for it, I found it. But there's literally a study somewhere that says that the brain, they don't make a choice. And I don't know if I'm going to research it and put it in the show notes. I don't know if it was specific to men or specific to us to decision making. They won't make a decision until they have a choice between two things. Or something like that. And it just made me release any story I had around that. It was a sense of freedom. I was like, oh, it's you're wired that way. It's not being disrespectful. And so I figured out a way around it.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of going from 0 to 1 rather than picking from a range of options. One is harder than the other, I think.
Yeah,
I think
true,
going from 0 to 1 is always the heavy lifting part of things. Yeah. And also where most of the fun is in a lot of situations.
And it's also the levels of consciousness. I might have responded with a specific type of food, but what I really need is a specific environment. And that's why I was choosing that food, because I knew it was going to give me the environment that was more valuable to me than the actual food. And when I figured that out, like, that's actually what made this conversation easier. Like, it wasn't for my husband. His deeper need is novelty and variety. So he's making choices with that context around food. And I was making choices based on the experience I wanted to have, inside, outside, loud, noisy, whatever, quiet. But we weren't conscious of that. So becoming conscious of how big that question was for us made it easier to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really great awareness, and probably, I imagine, makes negotiating and coming up with the decision easier.
I'm going to notice that and see if... So what's coming to mind is easier is relative. It is 10,000 times easier than it was 10 years ago, right? Because there's no pain and suffering around it anymore. But I have hope that it becomes even easier in the future. Like, I expect this, I don't know, I'm thinking on a line, like this infinite progression, right? We're going either towards this or away from that. And yeah, it is easier, but I sense that it can become even easier. I don't know where I get that from.
Well, I think in a partnership, we spend times, hopefully, if we're lucky, lots of times when we're fairly aligned in our desires and intentions and where we're wanting to go. And decision making flows more naturally from that place, because you don't first have to get on the same page and then figure out something that will be acceptable to both people. But in a long-term relationship and long-term partnerships, there are times when people are, not so much in alignment, maybe not completely misaligned, but not, as aligned as, the easiest times.
This is interesting though, because I think, and I agree, even though I'm the one that said it, like, ask better questions, like, I agree that's kind of loaded, but what's coming to mind is that sort of question, well, so what do you want to do? And that being met with a question like that, which can, for some people more than others, be very alienating. And the difference between that and like what you're kind of saying, Vivian, which is, hey, would you rather go to the beach or go grab something to eat? And then they might say, oh, well, actually, I was thinking more about, wanting to go check out this gallery I saw, like
that's exactly how it happens.
Yeah. Like, which can be generative. It can be frustrating, but I think there are those certain questions like, oh, what do you want to do? What do you want to, whatever, that like we meet blankly, not all the time, but they, so it's like offering something, a suggestion seems to be a little, you can kind of worm your way in a little bit more to the process.
Yeah. And the fact that it's a process, it's a fluid process. It's not a decision between either or, which I guess is a little bit about how I saw it before. Yeah. It is more iterative. You just described it perfectly.
Well,
Sorry.
We just want what we want though. Like the other day, it's like I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And it was either like, do you want to go with me or not? Because I'm not going to change it. Like this is, I'll either go by myself or you can come. But I knew, and I think there are times like that too, when, we're pretty sure of what we want. And then,
Oh, yeah.
I can't demand somebody go with me or want what I want. So I give people a choice. But like, I'm curious, like, so what are some of your favorite questions to get asked? Like if you're at like when you say, oh, I really, I'd like to go deep with people. What are the kinds of questions you either like getting asked or like asking?
So I have an opinion on this, like, because I can see a distinction. I prefer to be in the moment and let the question sort of arise, because there's so many things that impact what that conversation could be. And if I limit it, then I feel like I'm missing out on what the experience is. But I do find that there's a certain, I don't know if it's a personality or if it's a preference, that it's almost like some people practice conversations like, you'll say this, then maybe I'll say that. Then if you say this, I'll say that. So I think that's why I'm sort of taking a stand on this. I'm open to the experience of what that conversation can become versus saying, I prefer to be asked this over that. But I kind of shirked at parties. I'm like, I don't go to parties anymore. Strangers? Really, Nancy? Oh,
it's an imaginary experience for me too, pretty much. Let's just say there was a really good one and it was worth going to. No.
Worth getting out of our pajamas and out of the house. Before you answer, Shar, I just want to throw this in. David will look at me and say, I know what you want to do. And he's basically saying, without saying, you want to stay home and read. But this is what I'd prefer us to do. Can you jump in? Are you in for it? Yeah.
It's true. Okay. So as far as I agree with Vivi that I generally tend to be in the moment with these things, I definitely feel my way through. I believe that what I will kind of go to when I feel like, oh, here's someone I'd like to have a conversation with, I generally try to notice something about them and then sort of put it out there. I don't know if I can, the dumb things we do, like, oh, I love your shoes, or do you know what I mean? Because at least with women, because if someone's open to then sort of having conversations, stuff will go back and forth, and if they're not, they go, oh, thanks, and walk away. And you're like, oh, all right, well, that was friendly enough as far as I was concerned. So I think generally with men, less likely to start a conversation unless I notice somebody kind of noticing the same thing I'm noticing. And then there's a topic of conversation that is neutral, and not me trying to, initiate a relationship with him. Do you know what I mean? So it is very much in the moment. And then, but I'll tell you, some subjects that I very much enjoy talking to people about are travel. I think that's always fun, although it can get kind of braggy, including me. Sometimes I get that way. It's just because if somebody gets me going, it just, I have so much to say. So travel is one of my favorite topics for casual conversation. Yeah.
What about you, Nancy?
Yeah, well, what made me think to ask it in the first place was, interestingly, some of the things that I felt defensive about before, if people would ask me, have kind of shifted. So I think I used to feel really resistant to the, so what do you do question? And I'm not so much anymore. I find talking about what people do for a living more interesting after having gone through life coach training, because there's more to ask there with me. Do you enjoy what you do? What do you, I don't know, there's a lot more to those kinds of conversations, I think. But I would agree with, too, that I think definitely it's about spontaneity and being present, because there can be so much off-roading in a conversation real quickly if you talk about something you never imagined talking about with somebody sometimes, when you're just really present and there and people feel room to be themselves. But I would agree with Charlie. I like talking about travel. I'm curious where people have gone and what they've, and I'm always kind of curious about people's growth experiences, or I guess they kind of call them hell and back stories or whatever, or sort of things people worked through or were challenging, but then either something happened or, they did something and things changed. Life's twists, I guess, life's twist stories. Oh, if I'd never gone and done that thing, I never would have, whatever today, kind of stuff. Or if anybody starts talking about dead people who have passed, weird psychic phenomena, aliens, UFOs, I'm probably there. Like, all of it's not totally my thing, but if that's where you want to go, I'll listen and ask questions willingly to know what you think and what you've experienced. In California, that's not all that far off from just about everyone you meet either.
Sometimes I feel like I belong in California.
Oh my gosh. I went for singing lessons, and my second lesson, we talked about UFOs instead of singing. Okay. Unexpected. I like it when people surprise you, or when you, as hard as I try not to have expectations, I do. And it's fun to be surprised when, someone starts talking. And I think it's fun when questions can draw that out of people, or then like we can ask them in a way where we really get to see people how they want to be seen, like let them tell their story and, kind of be a space for that to really show up fully.
All kinds of things are lighting up in me. I'm going, yes, yes, yes. And I love the imagery that came to mind when you said off-roading. That is exactly the kind of conversations I like to have. Not the trails that are sort of well-worn. This is what you say in this setting, but that off-roading that happens when you're, fully present for that. Nancy, I think the way you said it is, they're sharing how they want to be seen, and maybe not the limits of the identity that they hold at the moment.
Well, I think that's probably why we're all attracted to coaching spaces and some of those, that's where you get a lot of opportunities where people's guard is down. They don't have the idea necessarily that they have to present themselves perfectly to you. Like, it's a bit of a special place where that's the intention, right? Like, you get to show up
totally.
As you.
Mm-hmm. And it's so special. And I think, and I might be getting this wrong, and it's a total overgeneralization, but it's also like this permission to not want to control or to control something. It's like, I'm jumping into this space to move with the flow, or to learn to move with the flow, because maybe I have an illusion that I control so much. And again, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but we, one, because we're trained, and two, because we have a personal inclination towards it, can move with that off-roading easier and are more practiced at it than maybe the general population. Would you agree to that?
Yeah, I think so. And the other thing that's coming to mind as you're talking is that in a coaching space, I feel like more of you gets to show up, and it's not just your shiny parts. So like, you get a really global view of people. And sometimes in those more kind of social settings where conversations are getting to know you feels a little transactional. It's like that kind of sharing of my best assets kind of thing, because we're worried about being rejected or what somebody's going to think, or, that can taint a little bit of a conversation, not necessarily always. But when the permission is to be present and be curious, and you don't have to be painting a shiny picture, like, whoa, what freedom.
Yeah. I think I'm drawn to coaching because I like to have those conversations, and most social interactions don't lend themselves. And you're just not even in the mood all the time. I know people who I have spent time talking to deeply at parties, and have also spoken to them at parties not very much at all, or only about superficial things. It changes. I think I have found, both on the receiving end, as in when people probe too deeply with me when I wasn't really asking for it, or that I have felt that I've crossed a line and need to back off with someone, there has to be permission to go deeply. I think that's the most important thing. And that's really, I think, part of what making conversation is, right? So it's like you're obliged almost to start very superficial and feel your way forward to whether there is enough trust and curiosity and common ground to move deep.
What's coming up for me is a question, because I love this perspective. I didn't intend it, but I love that it's happening, so I want to encourage it. And I'm telling myself that. Like, I'm speaking to you from sort of the listener. How do I feel my way into it? Like, I don't know how to feel my way into that. And there's this concept of, and I don't know the person who originated it, or I'd give them credit, but sometimes we think that we have to wake up, but it's literally this waking down that needs to happen, because we live so much in our heads and, in our intellect, that we need to learn how to feel and to recognize what those feelings are. So that's a question that I have for you guys is, how do you feel your way through a conversation?
I'll go first because I just said it. So I mean it literally. Like, how does my body feel when I'm standing here talking to this person? Do I feel a distance? Do I feel exchange? And okay, so how does that feel in my body? I might want to remain close to the person, or I might have the feeling that I just want to get out of here. I honor that. I try to do it politely. I just don't run away the second I feel it. But I'll wrap up, if I'm like, no, don't like the way my body feels right now. It might not be that it's that person. It could be something else that's going on within me, but I still want to attend to it. Let's see. Part of the way I feel it is like, I just can't think of anything to say. It's like, it's almost like I stand next to a person and I kind of search for the opening. And if I can't think of anything, I'm like, okay, nice to meet you. And I move on because it doesn't feel inviting. No blame, not anything, just not feeling it. So best way I can describe it. It's subtle, but it's also pretty clear to me. And I don't know if I'm right or not when I make my decision, but that's how I decide.
Yeah, I would say that, the same is pretty true for me. That it literally is a sensory thing. And boy, how do you tell someone that, it's just kind of feeling into the energy of your connection with someone, how that feels. And I think really in some ways, the only way you can assess is by how you feel in your body. Does being in conversation or connecting with this person give you a sense of ease and softening? Is there a curiosity there? And just kind of sometimes, and I think a part of it is assessing your capacity. Like, there have been times when I've met someone who was really interesting, but I just didn't have the capacity at that moment for whatever reason to be very present and engaged in conversation. And so, I may have moved away, but that didn't have anything to do with them per se. It was more like assessing where I was. So it feels like kind of a combination of this kind of intuition and bodily sensing. And then I think these days I do a tiny bit of a mental check-in to see if I have any little stories or biases or, things happening in a conversation. Because again, way back in my 20s when I was, just sort of living as I was taught, how you, shake hands and kiss babies and get ahead, I may have chosen to talk to somebody because I thought they could open a door for me or something. And so I do check in with myself. So just a little mental check-in at times, kind of on if I have some sort of bit of an agenda, and that's unacceptable, but I want to be aware of that if it's happening. And just for clarity of intention, clarity of communication. And again, with, I might approach something then differently or more directly, or, anyway.
No, that's beautiful. And through our conversation, I think we did a pretty, even though it's not good or bad, I think, explored this idea of asking questions and what kinds of questions you can ask as you're sensing your way or moving your way through a conversation. So I appreciate you ladies. Now, I cannot believe that we've been talking this long. So we're going to wrap up. I think I did this at the last conversation, but if there's anything you'd like to share or say in relation to asking questions, we can go around and share that from each of our perspectives. And I'll start. What comes to my heart right now is that whether we're conscious of it or not, we are asking questions. And so becoming conscious of what questions we're asking and then being intentional about the questions we ask will naturally shape the experiences we have. So it's an important in the way we live and experience life.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, that was my big aha from this conversation, is how embedded asking questions is in everything that I do every day. And I'm curious to see what putting my attention on that will reveal in the day to come. I think it's fertile ground. It's very interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, me three, I'll say it 4 times today. Yeah, I think that's my kind of big takeaway again from this today too, is that idea that, yeah, like every action is a response to a need. So there is this completely subterranean conversation happening continuously, and bringing curiosity to that. I also kind of like understanding things through a needs perspective sometimes as well. I think that opens up a lot of non-judgmental, non-binary kind of information in when those kinds of questions get answered too. So yeah, like I think when Char said that today, that was the ping, moment to bring attention back to for me too.
Beautiful. Gorgeous. Thank you again, ladies, for this heart-to-heart, deep conversation. I appreciate you hanging in until the very end. And I have a couple of extra resources for you since you are here. But first, I want to share with you that in 2014, when I started this podcast, it was actually so that I could have natural conversations like this, as a way for me to see what's inside and as a reflection. So questions are a really important principle and sort of stand to take in the way that you explore your inner life and your world. But I want to remind you that it's a process. So awakening your wonder is what you're doing, and it'll lead you to the questions that you want to ask. So I have 3 different resources for you. One is if your greatest intention is on having an inner conversation, so you're exploring this as a reflective tool. The second resource I have for you is if your questions are your greatest intention is to have connection or intimacy with your beloved or with a friend. I've actually done this specific tool with a friend. And then finally, if you want to have engagement or conversation with myself, with Shar, or with Nancy. So the first frame that I want to position with you is the way that you're asking questions. So I want to encourage you to ask what questions, not why questions. Why questions actually help you trap you in the rearview mirror. When I'm asking myself why questions, they really put me in what I call analysis paralysis. But if you shift that and you start the question with what instead of why, then it'll lead you forward. It'll help you to understand who you are, what you want, and the kind of life you want to lead. So what questions actually help you create a different possibility? So that's my biggest, I don't want to call it a tip, but just notice whether you're asking yourself what questions or why questions as you're having these inner conversations. So if your greatest intention is to connect more deeply with others and to build intimacy, or with yourself even, I want to recommend the 36 Questions That Lead to Love. It's a beautiful essay that was published in the New York Times, so you'll have to Google it. Google 36 Questions That Lead to Love. What it is it's a distillation of the research conducted by psychologist Aaron Arthur. What he did is he explored how to accelerate intimacy through a specific series of personal questions. So those questions are laid out for you in a sequence. There used to be an app for it. I couldn't find it anymore. But again, Google 36 Questions That Lead to Love. And I've done it for myself with a friend and actually shared it with those I love. So it was really cool. And then finally, if you want to engage in any of the podcasts, especially this podcast, it seems really intimate and powerful to me. I love the way that we each sort of go with our flow while staying connected to ourselves. So it's a way for you to see how it happens and also experience it a tiny bit, because as human beings, our minds can have the experience if we share it. It's like we're mirrors, right? It's very basically monkey see, monkey do. So it's our gift and our offering to you. But if you want to engage more deeply with us, then you can comment on the blog post on my website at viviancarrasco.com. I have the most fun on Instagram, so you can comment there. I will share a little segment of the podcast on my Instagram. And then finally, you'll also be able to find me on Facebook. And yeah, that's how we can interact. Now, if you want to have conversation in community where you can be guided and mentored by myself and have a peer group, then you want to join us in Within University. And that's withinuniversity.com. And it's a monthly membership. It's a subscription to an online community. And of course, you're always welcome to send me your questions directly at viviancarrasco.com. So my email is vivian@viviancarrasco.com. And you can either just connect with me if you have a question about anything we shared that I can share with the ladies, or if you want to contact me directly because you're interested in individual mentoring. So thanks again for tuning in to the Turning Inward podcast. We'll see you in a couple weeks.